In today's video, I'm going to be talking about abusive partners, parents, and pastors. So that's three P's: parents, partners, and pastors. Abusive ones, spiritually abusive ones, it really doesn't matter. But all three of these groups of individuals have one thing in common. And so I want you to take a minute to think about it. If you have ever been in a spiritually abusive environment, have come from an abusive relationship, or had abusive parents, what do you think they have in common? All right, so here's my take on it. I believe that these groups of individuals all expect a lot of praise for the bare minimum. Um, Something I'm going to take this. I'm actually taking this from Dr. Ramani. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Dr. Ramani. She is also a psychologist and she does a lot of work on narcissism. And in one of her videos, she said that narcissistic parents will often hold this over their kids. They'll say things like, I give you food and I give you shelter, right? Or they'll talk about like providing these basics and act as if they are doing their kids such a huge favor. And she said, do you know that orphanages are required to feed, clothe, and shelter their inhabitants, the orphans? And so these parents are basically wanting this parade and all this praise for doing what orphanages do for orphans, right? And so that is an example of what I'm talking about. So what I'll do is I'll go over the three groups. The first group that I'm going to talk about, it's important because this is a spiritual abuse channel, are spiritually abusive or abusive pastors. Now, I use pastors to go with the 3P theme here, but they don't have to be pastors. They can be leaders, any kind of spiritual leader that is emotionally unhealthy and abusive. And these individuals really expect a lot of praise for doing like the minimum. And you'll see this in different ways. One way that you will see this is sort of how like they frame the narrative around themselves. And so they might say things, and a lot of you have talked about this either when we've gone live or in the comment section. They'll say things such as, I don't have to be here. I could be doing something else, and I don't have to, come here each week and preach these sermons to you or whatever. They talk about what they do, but they talk about it in such a way where they're not getting enough praise. And, some of these, I'm not saying that every spiritually abusive pastor or leader is a narcissist, but I believe that many of them have narcissistic traits. Okay. And part of that is this insatiable need for praise and admiration. And so part of how they will craft that is talk about like the things that they do that they chose to do, right? Because nobody is, forcing them to do what they're doing, but they'll make it seem as if you owe them for what they're doing. Like somehow what they're doing is taking so much out of them. And just this like martyr complex, right? And often with this martyr complex that you'll see, the things that they're doing are really things that are in my opinion, the bare minimum. Like that's, if and the reason I say it's the bare minimum is think about that. If you've experienced being in a spiritual environment where the leader was healthy, think about how they construed those same things that they were doing. So whether it's like, visiting people who were sick or praying for people or putting together, a homily or a sermon or whatever, think about how that healthy leader would talk about it versus the individual that is the unhealthy, abusive pastor. Now, I always say, what do I say about this channel? You have to be able to think in nuance. People get burnt out, and we all have times in our lives where we don't like what we're doing. And even with the bare minimum, we're tired. And, We might want recognition for that. We might feel like we're not getting recognition. We can complain or vent to somebody. But that's very different from repeatedly making the people that you are in leadership over to feel guilty for something that you chose to do, right? And so that's important. So notice when they're wanting praise for the bare minimum. Another way, I explain how parents do that, but they'll often do that, not just in talking about feeding and clothing, but things that, parents are supposed to do. Kids didn't ask to be brought into the world. And so when a parent continually says to a child, well, this is what I do for you, and this is what I do, and all these other things, they're basically sending the message that like you need to praise me and thank me for all these things that I do. Again, there's a fine line. Appreciation is great and appreciation is good. The problem is that when somebody feels entitled to it and tries to shame the person to give it to them. So let's talk about abusive partners. Abusive partners often do the same thing. Now, it can be in more subtle ways. So, for instance, individuals who have been in these types of relationships will often talk about how their partner will tell them, well, nobody will ever love you the way I do. And they act as if loving that person is like this chore or this like burden, right? Like, oh, you're such a messed up person and nobody will be able to love you the way I do. And so, in essence, that is saying loving the partner, which is the bare minimum, right? People, that's what a relationship is based on. But they're saying, no, I need validation for this, and I need a lot of praise for this because you're not going to get this anywhere else. And so it is an indirect way of asking for that. Sometimes too, they will talk about the things that they do for themselves and act as if it is this huge thing that they're doing for you. So like, well, I, go to work and I put food on the table, but people also go to work for themselves, right? And so some of those things, it's very subtle, but they will want a lot of praise and a lot of admiration for that. Even things as awful as saying, well, I didn't lose my temper every day this week. I only yelled at you 2 days out of the week, and I'm trying so hard. And so there's this idea that what a human being should do is something very extraordinary that they're doing, and they deserve a lot of praise for it. A lot of this, you'll also hear this rhetoric when it comes to change. And so when there's some really good books out there that you can read about this sort of dynamic. There's one book, I know I'm going a little bit off track here. There's one book called Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft that talks a lot about this sort of dynamic. And then there's another book, David E. Clark is another psychologist here on YouTube, and he does a lot of work on like narcissistic spouses. And he wrote a book. I think it's called Enough is Enough. And then there's a David Hawkins that also wrote another book, and I don't remember what it's called. But if you just Google their names, you'll see. And they talk a lot about this. Now a lot of them will, and this is a common complaint that comes up with this, is that the partners are often described in male terms, and people are like, well, an abusive partner can be male or female, which is true. So just keep that in mind when you read the books. But the point is, they talk about this belief and this thought pattern that they have in which they believe that they're entitled to praise for the bare minimum. The things that everybody does, they think that them doing it is somehow very special. So even things like, an abusive partner who is physically abusing their spouse and continues to do so, they might say, like, I'm trying so hard. And they believe that the effort that they claim that they're having should be enough, right? So do you see how this is expecting praise for the bare minimum? So they're still harming their partner, every day, but they're saying, well, I'm trying my best and you don't even care. And they're still causing harm. So that is the mindset I'm talking about. It is this entitlement. I know I started out the video saying praise for the bare minimum, but I want you to kind of reframe that as entitlement to praise, right? nobody has to praise anybody for anything. And you can choose to, right? You can choose to say, I'm grateful to this person for this. And it, sucks to be, either in a relationship or an environment where you aren't getting what you feel is well-deserved praise. The issue is, do you feel entitled to it? And you can want praise and you can want validation. Listen, we all do. The problem is when we feel entitled to it. And these individuals, spiritually abusive pastors, partners, and parents, feel entitled to that. And so whatever amount of praise that you're going to give them is never going to be enough. And they often pull out this card when they are being criticized for something, either indirectly or directly. And so I remember listening one time to a particular talk by this spiritual leader, and I guess they had gotten criticized for something, and they started their talk guns a-blazing. They were like, listen, I have done all this stuff over the years. And if you don't know me to be this kind of person, then I don't even want you here. So that's how they dealt with the criticism. Now, people can deal with criticism whatever way they want. But what concerned me about this is that they didn't address the issue at hand. So, I'm trying to think of like an example, but let's say that, somebody was criticized, a leader was criticized for like not addressing a particular issue that happened within their congregation, right? Instead of saying why they did or didn't address the issue, they deflected that and said, well, listen, I've done all these things for you guys over all these years. And if you guys can't even appreciate it, then I don't know why I'm here. So do you see what that's doing? It's like fueling this guilt, and they're still not even addressing what they're being criticized for. And people who are abusive, leaders who are abusive, tend to engage in this pattern. So let's do the same thing with a parent. Let's say a child brings up something with a parent. They might say, oh, you missed this concert and I was really sad, or you didn't show up to this thing, or you embarrassed me in front of my friends. And instead of that parent addressing that particular issue, they'll be like, well, I work 80 hours a week and I put food on the table and I do this, this, and this, and that. And if you don't believe that I'm in your corner, I don't know what your problem is. And again, that is not addressing the issue. They are feeling entitled to being absolved from criticism because they've done all these things that, well, parents are supposed to do. Same thing with a partner, right? Maybe an abusive partner does something, harms their partner in some way, right? And maybe they lied about something, and the partner says, hey, like you weren't honest with me about this. And they're like, I'm not a perfect person. I think about all the other times when, I told you stuff and I didn't have to tell you, or I bought this for you and I didn't have to buy it for you, and all these other things. So they're basically, again, going on this like martyrdom, tour, and saying that they've done all these things, but not addressing the issue at hand. So I want you to keep that in mind, because oftentimes people are not going to know right away when they're being abused. They just realize that something is wrong and something doesn't feel right. And these tactics are abusive. And the reason that they're abusive is that they're taking a power dynamic and exploiting it. In this case, the leader who is over the congregation or the group is exploiting their position of power and using that power to avoid criticism and not addressing an issue. With a parent, it is the same thing, because that child is vulnerable, that child is weaker, that child is in a position where that parent is an authority over them. And so they're using that authority to deflect criticism. And the same thing with an abusive partner. And so I want you to remember these things, and remember how, I've talked about this on this channel, that unfortunately, when individuals are going through spiritual abuse, there oftentimes has been other abuse in their past, either from their family of origin or from a partner, or other situations. And so it's important to pick up on these patterns. The more you pick up on these patterns, the more you can defend yourself against them. So I hope this helps. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section as well. What similarities do you see between those three, or amongst those three groups? Let me know in the comment section. I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. you want to book a consultation, my website is skillsetcounseling.com, and you can go there and book your free consultation. I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye-bye.